Late September 1933, Frankfurt. A leader drives a ceremonial spade into earth near the stock exchange, while SA detachments hold formation and cameras capture the moment. He announces, "This is not symbolic. Germany's highway network begins now." The crowd roars. Brass erupts. Within hours, the image travels nationwide. One man, one spade, a nation starting its roads from nothing. What they didn't know, the highway was already built. 1 year earlier, in August 1932, the Cologne-Bonn motor road opened to traffic after 3 years of construction. Fresh concrete, painted centerlines, motorists testing speeds on a 3-lane ribbon designed by civic engineers like Robert Otzen, who spent the 1920s mapping Hamburg-Frankfurt-Basel corridors with T-squares and gradient calculations, not speeches. Thousands of relief workers had already laid slabs, cured joints, solved drainage. The road existed. Then came the microphone, a single heroic author, a national radio play titled "We Are Building a Road," with hammers keeping rhythm. The belief that spectacle could rewrite calendars. Within weeks, the civic engineers who built it, men like Theodor Krebs and Adolf Elsaesser, faced a choice: accept new letterheads and let their names vanish into a rewritten origin story, or lose their seats at the table where roads actually get drawn. They picked up their pencils. The regime picked up the credit. How does a finished road become a beginning?
The story that follows says a new order conjured highways from nothing. The fact underneath is that ordinary engineers and relief crews were already laying and curing slabs, painting centerlines, fielding complaints about dust and signage. The Cologne-Bonn motor road, later signed as A555, opened in early August 1932. After more than 3 years of works that included thousands of short-stint relief jobs and tender rules that sometimes limited heavy excavators to spread employment. A thrifty 3-lane profile stretched scarce funds. 1 year later came the microphone, the spade, and the word begin. Unstoppable machinery. A single heroic author. A nation beginning its roads. The numbers tell a different story. From the late 1920s through 1932, the road was built. In early August 1932, it opened. Robert Friedrich Eilert Otzen arrives like a graphite line snapped taut across a map. He was a civil engineer who founded HaFraBa in the mid-1920s, and what matters about him is that he gathered city engineers and traffic chiefs into a single conversation and turned ideas into corridors on paper long before the pageants. Picture him at a drafting table in Frankfurt or Hamburg, ink under his nails, an ashtray crowded with the ends of a long afternoon, a T-square set just so. Hamburg-Frankfurt-Basel, known as HaFraBa, was not a slogan but a network assembled by quiet people who believed that curves, grades and budgets, not oratory, decide where a country actually moves. The A555's opening in early 1932 carried no national broadcast, only local speeches and the rush of early motorists figuring out how fast felt safe on a surface meant for speed. A year later came a national radio play titled Wir bauen eine Straße, complete with hammers in rhythm and cheerful voices in dialogue, promising work for all. The oral spell turned abstract pride into something that sounded like a work site and smuggled in a claim about timing. We are beginning now. The belief switched on by spectacle. The road said already. In late September 1933, in Frankfurt, men with spades formed up near the stock exchange. SA detachments flanked the line. The march to the field looked like a recruitment poster come alive. A leader announced that the spadeful of earth he was about to lift was not symbolic, but an origin. He lifted. The crowd roared. Photographs locked in the angle where one man's arms looked like he was levering the land itself. A few hundred meters away, practical men checked schedules for graders and crews and permits. Some day laborers went home that afternoon with nothing to do. The heavy plant would come later. The pageant sold a beginning, while the ledger showed that coordination was still catching up. Roads are machines, and a controlled access motor road in the early 1930s lived or died on 3 tolerances: curvature, grade, and surface. Curvature had to stay gentle enough that a car traveling at a typical highway speed held the lane without a white-knuckle grip, which meant design radii often stretched 300 to 400 meters or more on the open stretches. Grades had to be shallow, around 3% where possible, so lorries did not crawl and engines did not overheat. Surface had to be uniform and jointed right, so slabs could expand and contract without shattering, because bad curing or joints out of specification meant cracks, potholes, and rework. The 3-lane profile on A555 was a compromise shaped by money and right-of-way that let a line of Sunday drivers breathe without paying for dual carriageways. It was math and mud, and someone like Otzen had to live inside those limits every day. In the final weeks of August 1933, a paper move reshaped perception when HaFraBa was absorbed into a state-backed preparation society with a longer, heavier name. The Gesellschaft Reichsautobahnen appeared. The map did not change that week. The stamps did. Titles changed. Forwards adopted a new voice. The credit line that once named a civic association shifted to an office with a seal. This window, spanning just over a week, showed the shadow travel across a page like a sundial. Theodor Krebs in Darmstadt, a municipal engineer mid-career, walked a corridor and stopped at a posted notice that his city's submissions would now carry a different authority line. He could object and lose his seat at the table where the alignment decisions got made, or he could keep drawing quietly under a new letterhead: rent and reputation. He kept drawing. Adolf Elsaesser in Mannheim arrived early the next morning, unlocked his cabinet, and slid out a folder. The stamp would be different that week, but the gradient still had to hold under 3%, and the city still needed an interchange that would not choke traffic from the Rhine Bridge. He picked up his pencil. The road won the argument for him. Years later, the same institutions that staged the beginning would file a caption in their own digital galleries stating that the Autobahn was not an invention of the regime. No gloating necessary. The period at the end of that sentence is enough. A myth turned on by sound and ceremony against a backdrop that already existed. The story is about to acquire a cost measured in hours, trains, and names. On January 11, 1941, at Bassenheim station near Koblenz, steam rose over a platform edged with frost. Norbert Vidocq stepped down, wearing a coat that harbored lice. The first thing to notice was the smell: wet wool and dog packed close together. Police and SS men with clubs forced a line of prisoners into motion toward a camp called Eiserne Hand, the Iron Hand. A name that sounded almost like a joke until the gate closed behind them. Dogs moved heel to heel with the men, and later Vidocq would remember the worst part: the men with clubs and the dogs. He slept little that first night. The bunk boards were rough, and his shoulder caught on a knot that would ache for a week. By morning, he was digging where a roadbed needed to exist. Shovel, tamp, haul, repeat. The day had its own rhythm: metal striking stone, breath in cold air, the sharp bark that meant, "Move faster." He worked 70 hours a week, days that left almost no room for rest. Each hour was the same motion grinding into the same muscles. A workday used to be something you chose. This was a schedule you survived. 2 days later, Uersfeld began taking prisoners too. Hilgert would follow within weeks. The road front wasn't one site with one story, but a corridor of cuts and bridges and borrow pits, each with its own count, each tracked against a date in some notebook. 3 camps were receiving flows in the first cycle. Nearly 1,000 people across them came in waves, train after train, with 40 to 50 bodies packed into each carriage, metal spines carrying heat and noise into the woods. A guard said something that revealed the system. Ohne die Neuen schaffen wir die Frist nicht. Without the new ones, we miss the deadline. In that complaint lived the invisible advantage of those running it. The logistics were competent. Trains arrived when quotas demanded. Rations appeared. Boots and dogs moved people at the right hours. The system knew how to keep time. One afternoon, a concrete pour failed. The temperature dropped fast. The water in the mix cooled too quickly. The surface skinned over before hydration reached depth, and later, a hairline crack threaded from joint to joint. Cut the section, lift it, pour again, this time with straw and canvas over the slab, and a small stove smouldering at the edge to keep the chill away. That single mistake cost 150 men a full day of work. Time lost to a simple weather turn. That was how a road worked, or didn't. Curvature, grade, surface, and the physics of water in cement. A winter pour would teach anyone what mattered more than words. Widok lay awake at night and counted steps between patrol points. He timed how long the guard paused to light a cigarette. He calculated whether the dogs would be leashed or free after midnight. He watched a man try to leave and disappear into the black behind the birches. The camp had its own math. Disappearances meant searches. Searches meant beatings. Beatings meant days lost to fever. He waited. The choice was rational. Live to make the next decision. On February 8th, another train arrived at Vallendar with around 300 prisoners bound for Hilgert. The platform steamed again. The camp made room. Nearly half again as many men arrived as in the first wave, a surge that strained everything. In lived terms, it meant more men on the same tools, the same food stretched thinner, the same path worn darker between barracks and worksite. Scale showed up where you could smell it. The mud turned from brown to black. The air tasted of smoke and concrete dust and cabbage. Even the dogs seemed less excited now, learning the routine like everyone else. 2 incidents belonged to this stretch. On the 12th, a scaffolding plank snapped, and a man named K fell hip first into the edge of the formwork and would walk with a list for a month. On the 21st, a foreman with a pencil behind his ear pulled a section chief aside and said the word Ersatz with a weary shrug. Replacement. Then pointed at a list where Widok could almost read the names. He didn't know whether to hope his was on it or not. The same public that had heard Wir bauen eine Straße a year and a half earlier would drive past this line someday. And the people who actually laid this segment would not be named in the brochures. Numbers stood there and dared you to say otherwise. What came next sent Widok to a cellulose plant at Siegburg, and that transfer revealed how labor fed multiple machines at once. By spring 1942, Widok is sent to Siegburg, to a cellulose plant that smells like boiled wood and steam and oil. His assignment there illustrates something simple but brutal. Labor is a fluid the system pours wherever a deadline is most urgent. The smell hits you first, wet fiber and hot machinery. Then the heat, slamming you when you walk in from a cold morning. A plant like this runs on feed rates and steady energy. Logs or chips go to digesters. Acid cooks out lignin. Pulp washes, presses, dries,
and sheets emerge on endless felt belts, with steam curling off them like breath. If the line stops, quality craters. That means overlapping shifts, hands on valves, eyes on gauges, quick decisions when a bearing screams. The numbers make the need plain. A medium-sized plant might push out several dozen tons per day, and every hour a jam could cost several tons of output. Every ton connects to a rail schedule that expects paper or fiber on a given siding by a given hour. Swap in coerced labor and you don't get better people, you get bodies that can be moved at the state's convenience. The system's competence is not kindness. It is a timetable with teeth.
Two incidents fold the plant into the larger story. In July 1942, a foreman spots Vidocq coughing blood into a rag behind a machine guard and has to choose: hide him for a day and risk being short on the night shift, or report him and risk both of them. He finds Vidocq a stool behind the dryer stack and counts heads twice to cover the absence. It buys a day and may have saved a lung. In late 1943, after a failed escape attempt, the Gestapo catches Vidocq. The line does not stop for that either. Someone else takes his place at the valve. Books about road workers appear with photographs that can stop your breath. Cheekbones like cut stone, eyes that stare straight through the lens, and forewords signed by a minister. The language is tight and elevated. Selbstlos, Auftrag, Gemeinschaft. Selfless, duty, community. The intent isn't to lie about roads, it's to claim their parentage and baptize their makers. The frame is beautiful and convincing because it pairs faces with a nation-sized sentence. Beside that book, a HaFraBa plan from around 1930 lists contributors like Theodor Krebs of Darmstadt or Adolf Elsaesser of Mannheim. Their names are small. They are not in the photographs. The stamp at the corner of the sheet, once a civic association's stamp, is now a national office's seal. Faces become authors. Authors become invisible. Statistics matter here precisely because they don't feel like much against a photograph. Editions of the worker portrait book ran to wide circulation, while the number of municipal engineers named in public-facing materials stayed small. The A555 was built over roughly 3 years, between 1929 and 1932, and opened on August 6, 1932. Yet the beginning speeches and broadcasts came a full year later, in August and September 1933, a gap that hides a road already built and functioning. In 1941, 2 prisoner convoys added more than 700 men to 3 road camps in a single month. And by February, Hilgert alone held roughly 300 of them. 11 to 12-hour shifts meant each man provided roughly 300 hours of coerced labor per month. A perfect photograph changes none of that. The state that staged a beginning will later write the caption that ends it. The Autobahns were not the regime's invention. It's not a confession from a single mouth, but it's close enough. The archives don't shout, they shelve, they number. They write the sentence and move on. That single sentence ends a long argument, more cleanly than 100 counter-speeches could have. The myth confronts institutional admission now. Robert Friedrich Elert Otzen dies in 1934, and the network keeps living under a new name. That is an outcome you can feel in the pit of your stomach. The thing you made survives, but the name that survives with it is not yours. Norbert Vidocq's path out of the road camps goes through heat and steam and a recapture that cuts the calendar in two. Neither man was asked for a quote in the brochures. Their work is the road you drive and the paper you hold. The archive's sentence beats years of spectacle because records are a different kind of machine. A caption connects an image to a catalogue to a policy to a curriculum. A single line of text in an institutional database propagates through libraries, classrooms, and search engines for decades. One caption can correct 1 million memories, slowly but completely. Wind on concrete, a car passing on the Cologne-Bonn strip early on a summer morning. The sign is sun-bleached now, the lettering still municipal, still unglamorous. Over that, the institutional sentence. The Autobahn was not an invention of the regime. The worker's face in the portrait book, then a HaFraBa plan where Krebs, Darmstadt, is a small line in the corner. Then Vidocq's name and the dates, January 11th and 12th, 1941, February 8, 1941, Bassenheim, Hilgert. The spade and the microphone and the words nicht symbolisch hanging for a heartbeat before the image's answer. The road was there already. People who never got a photograph paid for it. The archive, quietly, now says so out loud. The microphone declares a beginning. The road answers that it began already. The archive writes the last sentence. Between those three sounds is the story. A car glides along the A555 in early light, and the air has the faint dust taste of summer and concrete. Back in the summer of 1933, the radio said something simple. Wir bauen eine Straße. We are building a road. Within weeks, a man with a spade insisted on something else. Nicht symbolisch, not symbolic. In the records where captions live, someone wrote that it was nicht erfunden vom Regime, not invented by the regime. Robert Friedrich Robert Otzen's pencil lines became corridors, and then they lost their signature. Theodor Krebs and Adolf Elsaesser kept drawing when the stamp changed. Norbert Vidocq learned the arithmetic of myth the hard way, working roughly 12 hours each day, month after month of relentless labour, with dogs and clubs setting the tempo. And then he was poured from a road camp into a plant that needed heat, steam, and hands. The passage of months between one date and the next is measured in broadcasts and ledgers. The difference between a broadcast and a ledger determines which one lasts. The names were Otzen, Krebs, Elsaesser, Vidocq. And somewhere, a cataloguer wrote a line that changed everything.